Maybe Francesca's story was the story the entire book series had been building up to. It was the pinnacle of hot, steamy Regency romance for the entire Bridgerton family. This man compared himself to a pony and somehow managed to make it hot. You should not be underestimating him.
Wow. Oh my God.
What is it with chicks and horses, huh?
Delícia, delícia, assim você me mata.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I like to talk about entertainment media. Today, once again, we are visiting the world of Bridgerton. As requested, I have read Francesca Bridgerton's book. I'm going to give you some of the ins and outs, skipping over the details of a lot of NSFW stuff so that the YouTube overlords don't strike me down as if I'm the problem. Just let me do my thing and talk circles around the NSFW parts, okay?
Are you guys having sexual intercourse?
I'm expecting this video will be quite long, so I will do my best to section this video off into different parts so that you will be able to follow along with the various talking points. Obviously, this video will contain plot spoilers from the book and perhaps a couple of other things from the broader Bridgerton book series canon, so proceed at your own discretion if that's something you are trying to avoid, in which case, why did you click on this?
Tie yourself down to whatever chair you're sitting in, because this email is going to be a rough fucking ride.
Also, reversing that point back towards you, the audience, I have now only read books 1, 2, 4, and 6, Daphne, Anthony, Colin, and Francesca, so book spoilers from those books, completely fine to share in the comments. Book spoilers for Benedict, Eloise, Gregory, and Hyacinth, please refrain from sharing those for the time being. Maybe I will end up changing my mind and say, go ahead, especially if I have as many issues with the creative and narrative decisions in season 4 as I did season 3, but let's just wait until I officially consent to taking that filter off. Does everyone like my new shirt? Because I do. It's yet another new shirt from Japan. I don't have anything with peonies on them, but I figured something floral would be sufficiently festive. Also, jeans that actually fit me correctly. Why do I need to fly to the other side of the world to be able to have clothing that fits me? And these rips on them, they came with them. Who am I, Britney Spears? If only. Imagine being the ultimate pop icon. But enough about me and my new clothing, which I will undoubtedly continue to wear here on the channel, because what am I going to do? Wear these cute clothes outside in this weather? No, thank you.
I'm allergic to the sun.
You're allergic to the sun?
Francesca Bridgerton's book, When He Was Wicked, is the 6th book of the main Bridgerton series. In it, Francesca's first husband, John Stirling, passes away unexpectedly from a brain aneurysm. John's cousin, Michael Stirling, is next in line to take over John's title, though it's not something he's ever really wanted for himself. Michael has also been in love with Francesca for as long as he's known her, but he's never said anything or done anything to reveal those feelings to her or to John. He's been very careful about keeping that to himself. But after John passes away, Francesca and Michael become the main love story of the book. It takes a while for them to really get going because Francesca really loved John and he loved her, and that loss is very significant, so she's not exactly about to go running off to immediately fall in love with someone again. She is, however, eventually moved to try to re-enter the marriage mart, specifically because she wants to have a baby, or babies. She was pregnant with John's baby when he passed away, but she ended up having a miscarriage. Michael and Francesca's book was by far the most steamy of the Bridgerton books that I've read thus far. I was actually rather impressed. I didn't think this book series had it in them. As an AO3 reader, when you're used to all of the antics that happen on that site, the other Bridgerton books that I have read up until this point, they're just very tame in comparison. AO3 authors, they get away with anything they can think of. Does it have to be anatomically correct? Does it have to make sense biologically when we talk about things like human stamina? No. What even is biology? Never heard of her.
A flower's insatiable passion turns its life into a circus of debauchery.
When He Was Wicked, on the other hand, this book was delivering steaminess in abundance, at least once it starts to get going in that area. They take their time to get there because they really make sure you understand how long Michael has been yearning and burning and pining and whining, internally of course, for Francesca Bridgerton Stirling. By the time they really get together, he's been in love with her for 6 years.
It's been a long time, baby.
The show really can't play things in a way that comes close to the book timeline. Not that I think they're really trying all that hard at this point to follow things from the book, even if they are good ideas. But to give you some of the idea of the overlapping timeline, earlier on in this book, there is a mention of Eloise being unmarried. And then at the very end of this book, they make mention that Eloise has gotten married. Hello, editing me here. I just want to make a quick correction, which is that at the end of Francesca's book, Francesca learns that Eloise is a couple of days away from getting married, not that she is now married. Similarly, at the beginning of Francesca's book, Colin is unmarried. In the middle of the book, Colin is talking to Michael and tells him that he has proposed to Penelope that very day. And then at the very end of the book, Colin and Penelope have gotten married. So we see that there is this significant overlap in timelines for Colin, Eloise, and Francesca, the likes of which have not been done on the show. Colin and Penelope had their proposal, they got married, and all of that happened before we even got a single glimpse of Michaela Stirling. Now, a while back, I did a poll asking folks to choose the order of the next 3 Bridgerton love stories on the show, as in, if you, the person voting in that poll, get to decide which order they will go in, what's the order going to be? How are you going to order them? There was at least a bit of more or less every combination you can think of, but in general, I would say that the majority of people wanted Benedict, or if not Benedict, Francesca to go next, and then a lot of people picked Eloise to go last of those 3, largely because of the sentiment that she feels the least ready or set up to be the main Bridgerton of a season, and I would have to agree with that. If I'm picking the order, Eloise would definitely go last out of those 3. But between Benedict and Francesca, I'm sort of inclined to go back and forth of which I would personally prefer, depending on which factor I'm contemplating in that particular moment in time. Editing me again. By the time you're watching this, it's already been officially announced that my favorite Bridgerton, my capybara, Benedict, will be the main Bridgerton of season 4. I am going to leave in my opinions from when I recorded the other material you will see in this video, just so you can get the full portrait of my opinions at various stages of these announcements and rollouts. So you do not need to comment telling me that Benedict is season 4 just because me from a month ago or me from a couple of weeks ago is sharing opinions from before that announcement came about Benedict. I still find it peculiar that they were being as evasive as they were about Benedict being next up for as long as they were. Can we just go back to the season 1 model where it was made very apparent that Anthony was going to be the lead of season 2 in the season 1 finale, and you didn't dance around the confirmation when going and giving interviews to the trades? If you want a Benedict season 4 video though, leave me a cheeky comment down below about that, or you can just compliment these really comfortable pajama trousers that I'm wearing that I got in Japan. Now back to the video. If you had asked me before season 3, I of course would have said Benedict for season 4. You already made me wait since he's not season 3, even though he's the 3rd book, so do him next. Now that I've seen this version of Benedict that new management has opted to churn out, and the fact that they're so openly brazen with favoring Francesca, I have moments towards leaning in the direction of, let's just let Francesca be season 4, because I haven't seen proof that you can be trusted to do Benedict, my favorite, my capybara, in a way that I will actually enjoy as a viewer. But I also see the argument that making us wait even longer to get his love story also might not be the best idea either, particularly because of how bad his season 3 material was and how bad it's been to prolong us getting to see it. Oh, and in case any of you are new here, I am not against Benedict being bi or pan, whichever label you think suits him best. What I am against is bad writing for Benedict, or bad writing for any Bridgerton character for that matter. My issue with the Benedict bi reveal that I've said in other videos is how badly executed the lead up to that reveal was, and to that point, I'm going to direct you to a comment from one of my viewers. What I really find ironic is the new showrunner is queer, and she made the creative choice of making Benedict pansexual by basically hoeing it up and be devoid of his charming personality. As a pan, I'm getting really tired of this narrative. Sex with multiple people don't drive us, it's their personalities. And that more or less perfectly sums things up. You went from having him be completely removed from the idea of directly engaging with a same-sex hookup, and then immediately he does a 180 and he's fine with it. Not to mention, it was just casual hooking up. There was no deeper exploration of the idea of him being able to become emotionally connected in a non-platonic way to someone that's not a woman. That is bad storytelling. You just made him what? More promiscuous? And I haven't read Benedict's book. My attachment to Benedict is purely based on season seasons 1 and 2. And to be quite frank, still is, because I sure as hell won't be rewatching a single thing of Benedict from season 3. Not unless I have a video topic that requires me to do so. And that's certainly not coming up on the Bridgerton video to-do list I currently have anytime soon. Now, to be clear, with this video I'm making, I do not condone in any way, shape, or form sending hate to Masali, the actress who has been cast to play Michaela Stirling. Even if you think it's a terrible idea to do this gender swap, that gender swap was not Masali's idea. She auditioned for a role like all actors do, and she happened to book the part. She has zero say in those things, so don't be nasty to her. A whole lot of people in the audience have already revealed their true character by bullying and terrorizing Ruby Barker, which she has spoken out about on more than one occasion, and that is not something that I believe should be taken lightly. Her willingness to speak truth to power puts her at serious risk career-wise. Show business is highly retaliatory. If you choose to blow the whistle, there will be powerful people who will do things like blacklist you from future jobs. That is deeply unfair. And even if you fundamentally don't like this new showrunner's choices, don't send her hate either. I can disagree with creative choices made by her or any other number of people who make things in Hollywood, but art is ultimately subjective, and having a disagreement over storytelling, character arcs, things of that nature, it's not a sufficient reason to start sending threats and hate and all of that. You can be upset and disagree with choices that are made, but just don't send those things to her. Leave her alone. And while we're talking about the behavior and actions of viewers, I do want to make it very clear before we start going further into this video's runtime that this is not the space to say anything hateful to do with sapphic relationships, sapphic characters, or any sort of misogynoir. We will be talking in more depth about the material, of course, but given the nature of this change to the source material, I have already seen some unpleasant sentiments that are going beyond what I would consider to be reasonable criticisms of the execution of the storytelling. Are there some people who are hating on this change because of misogynoir, homophobia, and so on and so forth? Yes. Are there some people who simply dislike the change because of the execution of the storytelling that led up to that reveal, and or because that was one of, if not their favorite stories from the books, as it was presented in the books? Also, yes. If you are from the latter section, you should not be offended when people call out the bigotry in the backlash against the first section, because if you are not coming at this from a place of bigotry, then those call outs do not apply to you, so you should not be offended unless you're telling on yourself.
Lesbian.
Now, circling back to this question of running order, which Bridgerton goes next and when? The new showrunner was asked, are you planning to follow the formula of one main romance or couple per season, or will it maybe become two Bridgertons and their romances are the main story? To which she responded, I don't have any plans to combine seasons. I want every sibling to have their own season, and I know that Shonda wants that as well. I have some skepticism with this answer because now that I'm slightly deeper into reading the books, I've now read 4 out of 8 and I've seen 3 seasons, I think they need to do a better job of setting up 1 or 2 of the incoming love stories sooner rather than later. There's usually a B and C plot in each season, and right now I think those plots need to be focused on whichever Bridgertons are coming up next in the running order. I know a lot of people were presuming that Benedict's love interest would be introduced at the very end of season 3, because those people were assuming he was going to be the lead of season 4. So if he is the lead of season 4, you're going to introduce her in episode 1, and then you're going to speed run through that love story while you're pulling, 60% of the runtime to Francesca, because that's really who your girl is.
Not a joke, just a fact.
If Francesca is your favorite, which obviously she is, let's not pretend otherwise, just do her next, because I don't have any interest in seeing another Bridgerton's love story overtaken by a story you have openly professed as your favorite. It's been talked about ad nauseum in interviews over and over again. And mind you, I've looked through less than 10 interviews to prepare for this specific video, and yet that talking point keeps coming up. My approach to telling a queer story on Bridgerton has been to look to the books for thematic cues. I didn't want to just insert a queer character for a queer character's sake. I want to tell a story that accurately reflects a queer experience, and the first time I read Francesca's book, I really identified with it as a queer woman, maybe not in the way Julia Quinn intended. Now that I've actually read the book, it still feels like an odd choice to me. Now, I am open to changing my mind, but at least for now, where I have maybe, I don't know, 30% of the information, it still feels inorganic based on the options and the information that have been presented thus far. So I'm going to give you my POV, and I'll give you the showrunner's POV so you can have a well-rounded view of things, and maybe we can revisit this topic at a later date once we have more information to go off of. I am not opposed to doing a gender bend on a Bridgerton story, but based on the information that I have, I would have absolutely assumed you would do it with Eloise. To be fair, I have not read Eloise's book yet, but she just has a vibe about her, and that's not just me saying that, that's a whole lot of viewers that have been saying for years at this point that they really believe that Benedict and Eloise are not straight. I've also gotten a vibe from the viewers that watch my videos and comment on them that Eloise's book is somewhat, I don't know, maybe controversial would be the word. Now, I'm not saying that. That's just the vibe I get from commenters. Like I said, I haven't read it yet. Please don't spoil it. Maybe I will read it before the show. I don't know. We'll see. But from the showrunner's POV, her explanation about changing Francesca's love story is as follows. Her book is very much about Francesca feeling different and not really knowing why. In the book, I think it has a lot to do with her just being an introvert. But as a queer woman, a lot of my queer experience, and I think a lot of my friends' experiences, have been about that sense of feeling different and navigating what that means. I'm sorry, are we watching the same show? Haven't we seen Eloise struggle for 3 entire seasons with being an outsider to the Ton? Time and time again, that's a major aspect of her identity and her storylines. Her snapping at Violet about her being rebellious, all those scenes on the swings with Benedict. How is none of that screaming to you, she's feeling different and not really knowing why? Not to mention, I don't entirely love the idea of you snatching up Marina's husband for Eloise's benefit because, one, I don't want another all-white main couple on the show when this show jump-started its popularity to the masses by offering something new, which is ethnic diversity in Regency romances. No disrespect to the book readers, but I had never heard of these books, not even in passing, until it was tapped to become a Netflix show. And number 2, given how brave Ruby Barker has been to speak about what she experienced, I would rather you just leave her alone and leave the character of Marina alone to live a seemingly peaceful life with her babies and her husband who seems to treat her well enough for her to live a content life? Or would you just like to add insult to injury at this point? You want to let Eloise have Marina's husband when you could have given Eloise a wife? A lot of viewers also interpreted Eloise and Cressida's season 3 subplot as having some sort of tension to build up to a queer reveal for either one or both of them. Now, I don't mind people interpreting them that way because, like I've already said, art is subjective, although I personally didn't interpret that type of a vibe between them, but that's more so because to me, Cressida is a villain. I don't have any sympathy for her, so if you want to give Eloise a girlfriend, I would have assumed it would have been someone new to the show, and more specifically, a woman of color, because of my aforementioned point that the show needs to have a person of color in the main couple, or else I'm just not going to be interested. That's what the show was established as, and at this point, you need to deliver that diversity and a compelling love story for them that gets the airtime it deserves, or else my interest is going to start diminishing significantly in seasons moving forward. And if you want more of my thoughts on how they could have avoided this problem of not delivering the promised diversity well enough, you can watch my previous video, or one of my previous videos, in which I revisited a truly iconic era of Blasian solidarity in Hollywood cinema. Now, I do have a section in this video in which we are going to go through Francesca's book story in further detail to give more context about what is in the book, but I also wanted to point out for this section in which we ponder the idea of who comes next as the main Bridgerton of the season. The showrunner was asked, "Can you say who's going to be the main storyline for season 4? And she answered, "No, but I think we can be frank about the fact that it's either Benedict, Eloise, or Francesca. All 3 of them have a lot of growth still ahead of them, and that's very intentional." That does not bode well. It doesn't inspire confidence. Some people enjoyed season 3, and that's very nice for them. I did not, and the show has never hidden who's next. So to go from implementing so many changes to the show, visually, narratively, to completely flip characters on their heads in such a way that they no longer feel like cohesive extensions or developments of the seasons in which they've already appeared, and now you won't even tell us who's next? It just doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't sit well in my bones. Now, maybe they will go back on this and they will officially announce it in a month or 2. who can say? But when you also take into account the fact that they seemingly don't know whether or not they've got an official green light for seasons 5 onward, I feel like I'm watching an iceberg approaching and the captain just decided to speed up the ship. Listen, I know that comparison is hyperbolic and over the top, but I am in fact a romance girly who loves James Cameron movies because James Cameron is also a romance girly. That man has been serving top shelf romance for 4 decades. Are you kidding me?
When Avatar was almost done, and they were complaining about the flying scenes. Why does this flying scene go on so long? You've already proved the point. It doesn't advance the narrative. It doesn't advance the character. I said, you're right on every count. You've ticked every box like a good studio executive. But guess what? I want to see it. And I extrapolate from that, and Stanley Kubrick was a firm proponent of this principle. If I want to see it, my cognitive leap is there are going to be lots of people that want to see it and want to see it for itself, not for its purpose. Right? Because there is a purpose to the things you want to see. The purpose is to be present, to be in that world, to be enjoying what's happening, to sustain a feeling. So those flying scenes actually did have a big purpose. That's when Jake and Neytiri fell in love. And I got into a big fight with the studio over that.
Before we get into Francesca's book plot, I want to remind all of you once again that donation links for Palestine, as always, are in the description box. Just to start things off and give you a window into my experience reading this book, since I tend to read the Bridgerton books after I've already seen the season from which they were adapted, I usually see the characters in the book as they appear on the show, so it's more or less a copy and paste of the physical appearance of the actors. However, the book has Michael, whereas the show has introduced Michaela, and the original Bridgerton books are as white as a non-consensual, environmentally destructive golf course in Scotland, being bullied by the locals. If you know that reference, you know that reference. I did not have an actor from the show to use to visualize Michael, since Michael does not exist on the show, and since I am fresh off of watching season 3, my brain did a thing where it eventually put the actor of Benedict's badly written subplot in as the visual representation of book Michael. If the show had had Michael, I would not have wanted this actor because, like I said, the Bridgerton love interests should be people of color. But my brain was scrambling and looking for someone to put on him, and he was just there in my brain. And that scene where they're outside and he gets that look on his face, I don't know, it just seemed to aesthetically match Michael's vibe of smoldering, so my brain went, yeah, you will suffice. Chapter 1. Yes, we are going to run through this chapter by chapter. Chapter 1. After a lifetime of chasing women, of smiling slyly as they chased him, of allowing himself to be caught, and then turning the tables until he was the victor, of caressing and kissing and making love to them, but never actually allowing his heart to become engaged, he took one look at Francesca Bridgerton and fell so fast and so hard into love, it was a wonder he managed to remain standing. That's a good, strong opening and introduction to Michael. It's also an important foundation for their eventual romance because, like I said, Michael is yearning for Francesca for 6 years before they actually get to do their happily ever after. Now, I know that some people have said that they are tired of every male love interest on Bridgerton being a rake, and Michael Stirling is in fact referred to as the merry rake in chapter 1, but I would argue that he is still a far more developed character than the other male leads that are characterized as a rake in the Bridgerton book canon. They use him being a rake in the book as a sort of shield. It's a disguise to better hide his feelings for Francesca, and they actually go out of their way to explain throughout the book that he's incredibly particular about only being with women who consent to being with him. He's also very interested in making sure that his partners are satisfied with the encounter. And although it's been a while since I last read books 1 and 2, I remember having serious issues with the way book Antony was towards book Kate. Obviously, we know the controversy from the first Bridgerton story and the first book, so when you put this part of Michael's characterization in the larger context of the broader Bridgerton book canon that has come before this book's release, yeah, it's no wonder that Michael is as popular as he is, and as a result, it's not surprising that book fans would be upset that they are not going to get to see him in live action. Of all the love interests to change, I am flabbergasted that this would be the one that you would pick, but we will circle back to that more throughout this video. Another issue some book readers have is the way the show has diminished the love between Francesca and John. The showrunner can try to claim that it's still love, and no, you know what you did. Meanwhile, here's what the book says. Michael cleared his throat. This shouldn't be so difficult. It wasn't as if John and Francesca were acting any differently than was normal. They were, as so much of society had commented, like two peas in a pod, marvelously in accord, and splendidly in love. They are in love! And I don't like the verbiage of how John and Francesca's love is being spoken about in these interviews that viewers were pointing me towards when I asked for help with researching for this video. You established them by way of this really romantic meet-cute, and then you have her pulling a face on their wedding day. I don't like it. We'll talk more about that as we go through the book and after we've finished the whole book. Chapter 2, where the rest of her family was outgoing. She was not shy, precisely, but a bit more reserved, more careful with her words. She'd developed a reputation for irony and wit, and she had to admit, she could rarely resist the opportunity to needle her siblings with a dry remark. It was done out of love, of course, and perhaps a touch of the desperation that comes from having spent far too much time with one's family. But they teased Francesca right back, so all was fair. It was the way of her family. They laughed, they teased, they bickered. Francesca's contributions to the din were simply a touch quieter than the rest, a bit more sly and subversive. Why didn't we get more of this family banter in season 3? I barely have any sense of what Francesca's relationship is with the various members of her family in this latest season. The fact that Francesca is finally around, you've recast her, we're finally starting to get to know her. The show is called Bridgerton. We want to see the Bridgerton family banter, only for me to go and read Francesca's book and find out, yeah, she does get into those really fun bickering moments with her siblings. But did we get any of that on the show? Where was it?
No one knows what it is. It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right?
The next bit that I pulled. She often wondered if part of her attraction to John had been the simple fact that he removed her from the chaos that was so often the Bridgerton household.